Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, today we want to talk about how Luffy will compete with and maybe even potentially defeat Kaido. I want to give a huge shout out to @ASoberColombian on Twitter for reminding me of this theory. But the idea itself is relatively simple, given previous speculations that we've had. But I think that it's very possible and very cool, given there isn't a lot of options that we know of in order for Luffy to be able to compete with Kaido. But I think that in order to set up this video, I first need to power scale Luffy, or I guess give you my impression of Luffy's power scale as compared to the Yonko commanders and the Yonko themselves. And so I'm going to be honest guys, for me, Gear 4th is going to be, within the confines of the entire story, Luffy's technique which allows him to compete with Yonko commanders. As we saw in the fight versus Doflamingo, while Luffy is in Gear 4th, he's incredibly stronger than Doflamingo. And then going into the fight versus Katakuri, and even Cracker, while in Gear 4th, he's just as strong as they are. The problem is the time limit. Luffy runs out of Gear 4th before he's capable of beating them. But the power of Gear 4th itself is strong enough, fast enough, to defeat a Yonko commander. And so it's because of this time limit that going into the fight versus Cracker and going into the fight versus Katakuri, Luffy was not strong enough. So to get on a Yonko commander's level, he needs to increase the time that he's in Gear 4th. And I think that improving this time limit goes along with improving your Haki. As we can see, when Luffy goes out of Gear 4th, he's not able to use Haki for several minutes afterwards. I think that this in and of itself implies that he has run out of Haki, and that would be a major component of why Gear 4th has run out. Essentially, I believe, and I've argued this in a theory a long time ago, that Haki keeps the air within Luffy's muscles. That's why whenever he goes into Gear 4th, there's Haki that stretches across his body. There is no version of Gear 4th that exists without armament Haki. So in order to make Gear 4th last longer, you need more Haki. And this is precisely what Luffy is training right now against Katakuri. Obviously, he's specializing in a specific form of Haki, but I think just in general fighting and using Haki makes it stronger, makes it last longer, makes you have more of it. So anyway, this is how I see Luffy being Yonko Commander level. But I think that in order to surpass a Yonko Commander requires Luffy to have Future Sight Haki, or some other ability like that. It seems like Oda has chosen Future Sight Haki. So I think that Gear 4th, speed and strength wise, is superior to that of Cracker and Katakuri. The reason why Katakuri was stronger than Luffy was because of Gear 4th's time limit, and Katakuri's superior abilities in armament Haki and specifically Future Sight Haki. So then by Luffy obtaining this ability to see into the future like Katakuri, that would put Luffy above Yonko Commander. I think that this is very important heading into Wano and the Kaido arc, because we're going to have to move past Yonko commanders relatively quickly so that we can get straight to the Yonko himself, Kaido. Right now, Luffy is struggling against Katakuri, but I think that the only reason why or how Oda can make this work is because Luffy doesn't have to defeat Big Mom. If Luffy goes into an arc where he has to defeat Kaido, then defeating a Yonko commander cannot take as much effort as what Luffy's going through right now. So honestly, I think that going into that fight, Luffy will be very nearly just straight up stronger than Yonko commanders. But I think that the difference between a Yonko commander and an actual Yonko is like valleys and mountains. So sure, after defeating Katakuri, or shortly after then, Luffy might be able to last within Gear 4th for a very long time. He also might have the ability to predict the future, but that will not be what allows him to even compete with Kaido. Firstly, being able to see the future does not help you damage Kaido. And then going back into the power scaling, I don't think that Gear 4th is strong enough nor fast enough to, again, do any real damage to Yonko. So then Luffy really needs a power-up. And so let's again talk about where I see the story going. So I personally do not believe that Luffy will ever need to defeat either Big Mom or Shanks. I know that's very contentious, specifically when talking about Big Mom. Some people believe that Luffy will defeat all of the Yonko, but I just don't see it happen. Due to circumstances within the story, obviously Luffy will say that he will defeat all the Yonko, but it'll end up that some of the Yonko, specifically someone like Shanks, is going to get defeated by someone else. And I think Big Mom falls along the same lines. But that's not really important to what I'm going to say next, but I wanted to include it for clarity's sake. What's important is I think that the only Yonko that Luffy will defeat straight up in an honest fight is Blackbeard. It'll be Luffy versus Blackbeard to become the king of the pirates, or the strongest pirates, the two men left standing, and Luffy will straight up defeat Blackbeard. But I don't think that Luffy will straight up defeat Kaido in quite the same way. Like, even if he ends up defeating Kaido, we won't be able to say after the fight, well, Luffy was definitely stronger than Kaido. It's kind of like the difference in how Luffy ended up defeating Enel and Crocodile versus how he ended up defeating Lucci. When it came to Enel and Crocodile, I think most fans agree that Luffy got a bit lucky. There were things that went very fortunate for him. He was able to discover their specific weakness or was able to counter them naturally. But when it came to Lucci, I mean, maybe you can't say that Luffy was definitely stronger than Lucci, but Luffy defeated him in what felt like an honest fight. So I see Blackbeard's fight with Luffy going more like Lucci, whereas Luffy's fight versus Kaido, if he does end up defeating him, being more like Enel or Crocodile. Luffy will need to find Kaido's weakness, or naturally counter him, or acquire some sort of power that is only temporary, or get help. And so we've talked about this a lot in the past, but one thing that is very intriguing to me about the setup for the Kaido arc is there's potentially going to be a lot of allies for the Straw Hats. Obviously, you have the Minks, you have the remnants of the Whitebeard Pirates led by Marco, you have potentially some samurai. I suspect that the Grand Fleet will make its entrance, and most importantly, you have what seems to be the vast majority of the supernova. If you take the time to think about it, just an absurd number of supernova are likely to be in the Kaido arc, starting from Killer and Kid, Luffy and Zoro, as well as Appu and Hawkins and X-Drake. And I almost forgot about Law for just a second. So the only supernova right now that aren't clearly going to be in this arc are Jewelry Bonnie, Arouge, and Capone. But honestly, I think that Oda will find a way to introduce them. That this arc with Kaido is going to be like a Sabati Archipelago arc 2.0. All the supernova will convene. And like a mirror to the events in Marineford, where you see all the supernova who are watching the events unfold and Luffy is the only one there, this time all the supernova will be there. And so I think that obviously if they all end up being there, or maybe these three don't show up, but you have Killer and Kid and Law, they will do something meaningful in this fight. Kaido, the strongest creature in the world, Luffy's not going to solo Kaido, definitely not initially. And so thinking back to the entire story of One Piece, was there any major villain in which required multiple people to fight them at the same exact time? And it's actually incredibly rare. There's only one example. That would be Oars from Thriller Bark. All these Straw Hats teamed up together in order to fight Oars, but they were pretty much unsuccessful, at least initially. And so why this comparison to Oars is really interesting is that Kaido, just like Oars, is humongous, they're giant. In fact, many people speculate that Kaido might be of the same sort of clan, the Continent Pullers, as Oars was. And I think that this has a lot of meaning because just like Oars might be similar to Kaido, you have Moria, the main antagonist of that arc, specifically has history dealing with Kaido. Kaido and Moria used to be rivals until Kaido killed Moria's entire crew. In fact, some people go farther than that, and they speculate that the reason why Moria went out of his way to obtain Oars was because of his history dealing with Kaido. Essentially, they believe that Moria was plotting to get revenge on Kaido, and that the centerpiece of this plan for revenge was Oars. He thought Oars could take on Kaido. What do you do when you lose to a gigantic creature? You create your own gigantic creature. But anyway, before we continue, we need to clarify one thing, which is that it's most probable, in my opinion, that Moria is alive and we will see him in the future of the story. If you don't remember Moria's story, essentially after Marineford, there was orders to off him. And Doflamingo was to carry out those orders. But before Doflamingo could deal the finishing blow to Moria, he disappeared. It is oh so incredibly likely, I don't even want to call it a theory, that Moria was saved by Absalom, who has the invisibility powers. The things that he touches turns invisible. And it was additionally confirmed in SBS that Absalom is in fact running around the New World as a sort of photographer or paparazzi, using his invisibility powers to photograph things that other people just miss. So I think it's really likely Absalom ended up saving Moria, and so Moria is somewhere in the New World. And so people wonder, when will Moria appear again? What are his plans right now? And so one of the top ideas is that Moria, just as it appeared as though he was doing before, is attempting to gather powers in order to take revenge on Kaido. There's other thoughts as well that maybe Moria has something to do with Edward Weevil, and there is of course no guarantee that Moria is ready to take on Kaido or prepared to do that, or that he will show up in the story in Kaido's arc. But it seems like the setup is perfect for him to show up in Kaido's arc. Kaido killed his entire crew. Moria wants Kaido more than anybody else in the entire story. And if you want to hear something really sad, a really sad idea that I do believe in, is that when Moria does appear, it's quite possible that he has a zombie Oars Jr. Remember Oars Jr. from Marineford? We don't know what happened to him. It's presumed that he died. It would be rather cruel of Oda to choose to do this, but it would definitely make sense for Moria to have snuck his body in some way. But anyway, we're almost there. Let's bring this home. So let's assume that Moria appears in the Kaido arc. Obviously, Moria will be intending on defeating Kaido just the same as Luffy, which would make him an ally by circumstance. We're also assuming that Kaido is essentially undefeatable. And we've also drawn parallels between the Strides fight versus Oars and maybe their future fight against Kaido. Maybe there's some similarities or some parallels that will be found between these fights. One of these parallels I've suggested already is that there will be a tag team effort to try and take down Kaido, which will be for the most part unsuccessful. Numbers just cannot prevail versus a creature such as Kaido. You need raw strength and power in order to even phase him, because the dude seems completely immune to all damage. This is why the most popular speculations for how Luffy might deal with Kaido is either an awakening or Gear 5th. And going back to the Oars fight, after the tag team was for the most part unsuccessful, what happened? Luffy came in as Nightmare Luffy. If Moria ends up appearing in Kaido's arc and intends on defeating Kaido, there would never be a better time to reintroduce Nightmare Luffy. Nightmare Luffy is a boss, but most importantly, it is a temporary power-up. The perfect kind of power-up to allow Luffy to deal with Kaido. Maybe not specifically defeat him, but put in some work, make the fight interesting. All Luffy would need is cooperation from Moria and Shadows. And if Moria's doesn't have zombie Shadows readily available, Shadows can be provided by those there that were defeated by Kaido in some sort of group fight. Whether that be the entire Straw Hat crew, or maybe some of the Supernova. A lot of people may think this pretty ridiculous, but I think it's very possible if Kaido simply defeats them all and they are all about to die. Luffy is their last hope. Let's give Luffy our shadow to see what he can do. And guys, in addition to this, I think that the New World version of Nightmare Luffy would be so much stronger than regular Nightmare Luffy from Thriller Bark. This would tie in oh so perfectly well with Luffy training his haki. Because if you remember back in Thriller Bark, the only way to control the shadows within you was using willpower, which is haki, it's the same thing. If Luffy could handle 100 shadows in Thriller Bark, what can he handle now? And what will happen to Luffy when the shadows that he absorbs do not come from scrubs, they come from actual contenders in the New World? And can Luffy combine Nightmare Luffy with maybe Gear 4th? Gear 4th Nightmare Luffy. If you're looking for Luffy to have an absurd power-up, this honestly should be on your list of possibilities. And honestly, if you're asking me personally, I would be rooting for this happening. I think it would be absolutely fantastic. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much all I wanted to share today. As always, let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree or disagree and why. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you dislike the video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.